Of course, the first kind of content I pull out after a long break is Fatui content. Given that 10 out of the 11 Harbingers have already been revealed with only one left, I think it's finally time to consider the Fatui's role in the story and if they'll even be able to achieve what they want. Well, given they don't end up like the civilizations we've seen in the past. But for today, welcome to the Fatui are screwed theory, named by yours truly after the bright realization that perhaps the Harbingers are a little over their head when it comes to their plans against Celestia. Today we'll be dissecting an important question about the actions and long-term goals of the Fatui. How likely is it for the Fatui to succeed in their plans of rebelling against the heavenly principles? If you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. As a disclaimer, this video is not indicative of the final product and is merely a hypothesis of what's to come. Not to mention, we are only in Inazuma at the moment. So let's not get carried away because maybe Ildotori has a nuke or Scaramouche is actually a shade of Fanis. Anything could happen at this point, so take this video as simply with the information we have at the moment. Anyway, let's begin. To understand the overall plausibility of the goals of the Fatui, we first need to set ground rules about what the Fatui wish to accomplish in their so-called fight against the heavenly principles. We know that they are a militaristic group of people with abilities that extend beyond even regular vision wielders. Also, we're looking at the overall general goal of the Fatui as an organization instead of the individuals. The level of loyalty that a foot soldier has may be incomprehensible when compared to the Harbingers, and even each Harbinger has a different reason for joining the Fatui in the first place. According to the funerary mask, perhaps it is fair to say that only those who possess an obsession close to, or even exceeding the level of delusion, might be willing to join this group that so rebels against the heavenly principles, binding the remaining days to their delusions and burning as brightly as stars. Of course, many within the Fatui are simply consumed by power and are simply sadists. Nor are these states necessary in conflict. Observing from the pale flame, we also get the idea that the Fatui will don their masks in mockery of the world as they go forth and rewrite the rules of destiny. Each one of them has borne witness to the absurd callousness of the foundational principles of the world. There is one theme that goes with how the Fatui deal with the overthrowing of the heavenly principles. They are motivated by their distaste of the gods' rules. Patterning this with the other pale flame artifact sets, and you can see that each of them have a semblance of non-conformity to how the world's laws are dictated, divine or otherwise. There is an overarching theme of isolation, discontent, destruction, and everything in between. But there is also an underlying goal of rebirth and revival of society. According to the Polar Star, "You who will walk with us into the land of darkness, come. We shall create a new world together. Know that the destruction of all precedes the birth of new order. At devastation's end, we will greet a stainless dawn." Following that, we have Tartaglia's line and the line of the Shivada gemstone. The promise that Piero gave to La Signora also follows the theme of burning away the old world for peace. And in the Chasm World Quest, we get the mention of what the final goal of the Fatui is and what they tell their subordinates. It's no surprise that outsiders fail to understand the cause of the Fatui. But when we aren't talking about what we pursue or which side we're on, we are just a bunch of ordinary people. Besides, all of our agendas and deeds are just preparatory work for the final battle. Yes, in the end, all of us shall face a common enemy and the inescapable long night. Everyone in Snezhnaya has been thusly warned. So, every drop of tears and blood of mankind, shed for the sake of this cruel world, they shall not be shed in vain. Regardless, there's a theme of sacrifice that also undergoes all of this. People that are willing to die for the cause. Even Tartaglia and La Signora are ready to fight for their own individual ideals. But now that we have the grounds for why the Fatui act this way, the question is if that sentimentality they carry is practically enough. Because we've seen what Celestia is capable of doing. While the Archons we currently know may or may not entirely be the strongest, we know that there are gods much higher than them. The problem is, we never truly got to see them fight at full power. The Archons in their prime can terraform as evidenced by the Golden Apple Archipelago, the Guyan Stone Forest, and the Musuo Gorge. If they are the weakest in the hierarchy of celestial powers, then that means there exists gods capable of so much more. Two individuals we know of at the moment are the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles and Istaroth. One is a god that was able to defeat the Travelers who were at full power, while one is known as the god of time that helped the other Archons in her own way. Additionally, the Shades of Phanis, for example, created humanity itself. How do you fight something like that? They also have magic that is capable of obliterating civilizations that are far more advanced technologically than Snezhnaya. The Skyfrost Nail, for example, has appeared in two separate civilizations. Conria's past at the current moment of the lore is objectively stronger than Snezhnaya for the sole reason of the art of chemia, alchemy, and the biomimetic ruin machines which were part of their arsenal. We also don't know if the civilization itself delved into abyssal magic, but there is a way for them to manipulate or enhance elemental energy to the point of sentience, autonomy, and intelligence. Something that is not yet proven to be a Snezhnayan capability save for the theorized origin of Catherine. But even then, she has her own limitations. Additionally, there is a possibility of elements existing beyond the 7 we know now. Sure, we have physical damaging abilities, but abstract concepts of time, space, cosmos are so inherently superior for the sole reason we have no idea what are the limitations of those abilities. Time alone as an element of the gods can send anyone into a maddening frenzy. I wouldn't even be surprised if this is the reason Celestia hasn't attacked Snezhnaya yet. Snezhnaya hasn't advanced to the point of being a threat to the overall stability of the foundational principles. There is reason to believe Snezhnaya's goals of overthrowing the heavenly principles is impractical at best and suicidal at worst. But there might be hope. In the event that Snezhnaya does have a plan under their sleeve that can somehow hold a candle, what would those plans have to be? Well, let's see what they have now. First is that they have access to preservation magic, or at least the knowledge that preservation magic exists. We know this because characters like La Senora and Piero are hinted to be 500 years old and above. The Fatui are also capable of unlocking the hidden potentials of artifacts and enhancing them. This might have been what they were doing for the Ruin Guard's factory, but most definitely what they did for Kunikuzushi. Then they also have the access to delusions. Delusions are created from Archon residue, meaning they are inherently celestial magic simply tampered with through unknown means. It's possible that the best way to counter a divine entity is also through celestial magic of their own. Given that there is such a thing as an Archon war, or more specifically, the War of the Demon Gods, it means that Archon magic is capable of harming or even killing other gods of the same or lesser caliber. Why can't delusions made by the Tsaritsa or Urabashi do the same thing? Or heck, maybe even visions. We also know that the Fatui are collecting artifacts that are connected to the power of the gods. The Gnosis as a victory plan is actually very fascinating to consider because we technically have not seen it in full power during the events of the game. In lore, we never got the full definition of how a god uses their Gnosis to tap into the elemental spaces, and to what extent it amplifies their abilities. The best we can go off on is the fact that Zhongli can no longer use his Gnosis to create Mora. Venti never used his Gnosis against La Senora when he should technically have the power of the Thousand Winds, at least to our knowledge, and we never saw Venti try to counter the harsh winds in Mondstadt during Storm Terror's attacks. Raiden A can still draw the power of the Musou no Hitotachi, which is both a sword technique and an elementally infused attack given the sword glows a mortifying shade of purple. What the Tsaritsa will do to their Gnosis is most likely the biggest bargaining chip that they have at the moment. If it is a source of power, then they will be able to amplify their arsenal by a lot. But another strange weapon they have is their abyssal origins. According to the lore, abyssal magic is antithetical to celestial magic because it was also capable of harming Zhongli and Venti. Some Harbingers have potential connections with magic that is both artificial and abyssal. Tartalia's foul legacy was taught to him in the Abyss by Skirk during his 3 months down there. Additionally, La Senora's soul transformation into a witch might not be inherently humane either. Given the proximity Senora had with abyssal monsters during her purge after the Cataclysm, it's possible her magic and the abyssal energy from the monsters cultivated and created the monstrous form of La Senora. Just by what we know of general corruption through proximity, prolonged stay in anything contaminated by the Abyss is sure to have its own negative effects, much like the Bloodstained Knight and Tartaglia. Pyromancy in and of itself shouldn't have that much of a physical effect on her, given it's just an elemental study. You claim to have no tears left to cry, no blood left to shed. But surely, this is because you have filled yourself with fire. Though your body has long been covered in scars, fierce flames are all that now may flow, like molten iron, from your eyes and your wounds. So in conclusion, if the Fatui are able to properly harness abyssal energy, maybe to the same extent as Daughter in her creations, there's a good chance that they can fight Celestia. Maybe create their own abyssal creatures or investigate the properties of corrosion that other abyssal creatures have. The possibility of Snezhnaya's arsenal is currently impossible to tell for the sole reason we are so early in the story, but also because they don't have a reason to reveal their origins to the Traveler. But to be brutally honest, if Celestia caught wind that the Fatui are tampering with abyssal energy willingly, there's a good chance there won't even be a Snezhnaya in the first place. So the question is, why doesn't Celestia just destroy Snezhnaya now? Why let Snezhnaya instigate a war themselves? Well, there are three things that I can think of. One is that they're not a threat. Honestly, this is the most plausible. Snezhnaya is a political entity. Yes, they are powerful elemental enemies to us as a player, but the way they influence the world in lore is through politics, contracts, and other really boring things that aren't fun for the player. They are charismatic, intimidating, and intelligent people who understand when to strike and how to strike. They gather information, and they play the long waiting game. But at the moment, Celestia has no reason to see them as a threat, especially if they're still so weak technologically. Plus, the passing of the Gnosis is recent. Secondly is that Snezhnaya is a civilization under the jurisdiction of the Seven. The civilizations of Enkanomiya, Salvindignir, Conria, and even the Chasm civilization predated the Archon War in terms of existence and rulership. 3 were destroyed or abandoned before the institution of the Seven, and 1 remained without an Archon. It's possible that the 7 nations fall under another set of rules as opposed to the old civilizations come the establishment of the Archons. But the evidence for this claim is still unknown. Would the Tsaritsa's possible treason be grounds for breaking any pre-existing laws about the 7 nations being protected? Who knows, really? But thirdly, and this one is my favorite, is that Snezhnaya's death is simply not meant to be at the moment. In the Prayers artifact set, we see that humanity and the gods aren't necessarily against one another. The gods don't despise humanity or think of them below, and they do genuinely wish for their prosperity. The gods were kind in giving humanity gifts. It was simply that humanity overstepped their boundaries and demanded things that the gods weren't willing to give. Conria itself, despite being an Archon-less land, still had connections to the heavenly envoys. It was a prosperous time, a period of bountiful harvest. Then the earth was blessed and ruled by the heavens, and the elemental flows were smooth and well-ordained. 100 years of bounty were written in the stars, but all prosperity must someday end. But this does not mean that nothing is eternal. At the end of the cycle, the earth shall be renewed. Thus, eternity is cyclical. The motivations for destroying Conria are still unknown at the moment, except that it was possibly divine retribution for the sins done by the Eclipse dynasty and Daughter. The closest we have to this is hinted at by Piero, where he says that there was an ancient civilization that had a foolish ruler that didn't listen to the warnings. But regardless, we have nothing else. We know that the Cataclysm affected the citizens of Conria as well, and effectively plunged the world into darkness. Perhaps Snezhnaya has yet to reach apex potential. Maybe they're meant to continue where Conria's technology left off. Maybe they are the change at the end of the cycle, where the earth shall be renewed, and that's why the gods don't want to intervene because it's natural. It was always meant to be this way. But regardless, the plausibility of Snezhnaya being able to usurp, or at the very least reconstruct divine law that has existed for millennia is very unlikely. And the question is, what would they even change it to? If the divine law has been the foundational principles of this world, what would happen if the structure of society is suddenly changed because of human ambition? Is this change really for the best? Anyway, my name is Aster and thank you for chilling with me.